The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Today's guest has built a life around storytelling, first as a journalist, then as a documentary filmmaker, and eventually as a feature film director and novelist. Bill Bennett has made 17 feature films, won major Australian film awards, has had films screened at Cannes and Toronto, and built a career exploring the human experience through story. But one of the most important stories he's told began not behind a camera, but on foot, when he walked the Camino de Santiago, the 800-kilometre pilgrimage across northern Spain. That journey not only became his best-selling memoir, The Way, My Way, and a film, but also deepened a lifelong interest in intuition, spirituality, and the biggest questions about why we're here. Bill's reading reflects that same curiosity, ranging from Ray Bradbury and Steinbeck to Autobiography of a Yogi, The Kybalion, and the channeled teachings of Paul Selig. And as often happens with writers and filmmakers, those influences didn't stay on the page. Bill Bennett, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie.
So your earliest memories of books go back to childhood library visits with your mother. Do you remember the moment when reading shifted from entertainment to something that started shaping how you see the world?
Crikey, what a question. Books were always important to me, and I think we're influenced so much by our parents, of course. Had my mother not taken us to the library of a Saturday morning, I don't know whether I would have attached myself to books as I did at that time and then throughout my life since. I just read voraciously, Sandie, from a very early age, and I've continued that since. And I can't understand how people can live in a world and not read. There is so much to learn. There's so much intelligence. There's so much experience from others, that you can just absorb through books. That more so books than films. As you know, I made this film The Way, My Way based on my memoir. I've been in Q&As all around the world, and sometimes I get asked the question, which do you prefer, the book or the film? And I always say the book. Because the book, number one, the book has so much more in it than a film can ever deliver. A film delivers emotion. A book delivers fact. A film is not a vessel for delivering fact unless it's a documentary. Films are a vessel for giving people an emotional experience, and that film certainly did that. There wasn't one screening that I attended where the audience didn't break out into immediate applause at the end of the film, and people were crying at the end of the film. At the beginning of the film, there was a couple of scenes where they're really quite funny, and every single screening, people laugh. They just laugh. And from a filmmaker's point of view, there's nothing more thrilling, than to see your work connecting emotionally with an audience. I mean, that's you said before, I'm a storyteller, and that's what I am. And part of storytelling is disseminating your work out to the widest possible audience. That's how you know you're successful.
And when you were, 17, you found the first book on your list, The Teaching of Buddha. You found it in a hotel drawer in Tokyo. What was it doing there? Was that like, in America they have the Bible or something in the drawers in hotel rooms. They don't seem to have that in England. Is that their version of the Bible in Japan?
That's what I gathered later on. My my parents had taken my brother and myself to Japan because our sister, our elder sister, was working at a big expo there in Osaka. And we landed in Tokyo first night. I don't know what prompted me to read the book. It just called to me. It was and you're absolutely right, Sandy. It is the Japanese version of the Gideon's Bible. And the book, I sent you a photograph of the book. I've still got the exact copy that I read that night. And I've read it many times since, and I don't know why I connected with it. I simply do not know why I connected with it. But it spoke to me on a very deep level immediately. Now, something's quite interesting, and I've been trying to figure out the timing on this, but on it must have been my 17th birthday, in August, I got my driver's license. And I went out driving in my mother's car with my brother and a friend, and I did stupid things, and I rolled the car 5.5 times. My brother was in the back seat, and he was thrown from the vehicle. He was 18 months younger than me, and we're very close. And I always remember, it was at night time, hadn't been drinking, just foolhardy. And I remember running back down the road and finding his body by the side of the road. He had brain, his skull was fractured. He came out of it okay. But I wonder now, and it's only really, with this, if you asked me to figure out these books, that I realized that was only months apart from me reading that book. And I wonder whether or not that was in preparation for what was to come. That I had a framework within which to operate. I hadn't thought about that before. My brother is now a retired vet. He's led a very successful life. We are still very, very close. He's my closest friend. And but I still have nightmares of running down that road and finding his body. Influenced my work ever since, because so many of my films are road movies.
Yeah. Certainly when we look back, that we see all those dots, and join them up, and we see that, doesn't look like there's any accidents there. Those random events that we think bad luck or whatever all have a purpose. Yeah. So was that the first spiritual book that you read?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't know whether I'd read Jonathan Livingston Seagull before that or after that. I think it must have been after that. And I do regard Jonathan Livingston Seagull as a very much a spiritual book. And of course, it was very popular at the time, and I don't know how many people sort of saw beyond its facade, because it was a very clever facade. But certainly going back to the Buddhist Bible, it sparked in me a very deep interest in Buddhism. And I went from, when I came back home to Australia, I then started reading other books on Buddhism, and I got into it really quite heavily for many, many years. I remember a couple of years later, I went to, at that stage it was called Burma, principally because it was a very strong Buddhist country. It was effectively closed to tourism, but I managed to get in. I had only 7 days. And I went up to Mandalay because I wanted to look at the Buddhist scriptures there. And I remember being on a boat, a banana boat, coming down the Irrawaddy after visiting Mandalay. It was late in the afternoon. The sun was setting. It was just golden. It was a freaky golden light. And the banana boat stopped at a little jetty. And I looked from the jetty, leading up steps up a hill, to a Buddhist temple. And it was all gold. And the late afternoon light was making it shine. and it was like a beacon to me. And I thought, I can just step outside this boat now. I can just walk off this banana boat, step onto that jetty and walk up those stairs and stay in that temple. And Sandie, I was that close to doing that. I don't know why I didn't, but I remember it just pulling me so strongly. Yeah. But I finally moved on from Buddhism because I thought in many ways it was sort of a very negative religion. You know, its whole basis really was suffering and detachment from suffering. And I didn't see the world that way. You know, in my early 20s, I saw the world as being a place to explore, and to find love. You know, and my interpretation of Buddhist texts at that point was that love was the ultimate attachment. You know, and that ultimately it would end in suffering. And of course, love does end in suffering, one way or another. I mean, I've been married now for 45 years. And one day my wife is going to die, and I'm going to be in enormous grief. I'm going to suffer. Yeah. But I wouldn't give that up for the time we've had together. And so that was sort of a game changer for me when I started to think of Buddhism in those terms. And I stepped aside from it, and I started looking elsewhere.
Well, it's interesting that you read Jonathan Livingston Seagull in the same year, because there's one with the Buddhist, you know, the kind of framework around it. And yet, when you think of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, it's freedom. You know, it's just the opposite. It's potential, it's possibility, it's everything. And that book is such an interesting one because out of all the books that have been recommended, every year that book is in the top 10 recommendations.
Oh,
More
really?
people, yeah, that book, over and over and over again. I often, you know, I'd like to get inside his head and, you know, ask Richard Bach, well, you know, how did this come to you? Because I'm sure it was just a download. And I'm sure that even he at that time didn't fully understand what he was writing.
Yeah, it was an audacious book at the time because it was only very short. It was only about 100 pages or so. But it had pictures in it, you know, and that in itself was audacious. There hadn't been a book like that come out. Yeah.
I remember reading a story that he went on the road, you know, I mean, in the air because he loved his plane, but he started going all around America, and you know, we didn't have cell phones in those days, but he one day stopped somewhere and decided to call his publisher, who'd been trying to track him down because the book had become this phenomenal success and he didn't even know about it.
Really?
Yeah. Imagine that. It's a whole other era.
Yeah, a whole other era. But you know, it's a parable. It's such a, on the surface, it's such a simple story, and yet it connects on such a profound level.
The third book on your list, The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. That was published in 1951. So you said that you were about 12 or 13 when you picked up a dog-eared copy of this one?
Yeah. Every year, my family, we lived in Brisbane, in Queensland, and every year in the winter holidays, we would go to the beach and we would rent a place. And what I did always was I checked out their library, you know, because when you rent a place, people leave books. And I found The Illustrated Man, and I read it cover to cover. I read every single story. I think I read some twice. And it introduced me to the mind of Ray Bradbury. And Sandie, it just absolutely took the top of my head off. And how I think it intersects with and the reason that I've included in this list is that it broadened my imagination, basically. And it took me into other dimensions and other realms. and also led me then to read more Ray Bradbury, like Fahrenheit 451, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and so forth, some of the classic Bradbury books. But I think the most important thing that I got from that book, and the reason that I've included it, is that it opened up my imagination. And I think imagination is one of the most critical things in spiritual development. You have to let go and embrace wonder, embrace mystery, embrace the notion of the unknowable. And Bradbury did that for me. He opened up that door. He told me these things could be possible.
Yeah. Book number 4, John Steinbeck, The Pearl, 1947. And you said that you've chosen this because it's a gem of a book.
I read most of Steinbeck when I was young, and he became a very important author for me. East of Eden, being one. This book I chose because it's, once again, a bit like Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's a parable. It's a novella, really. And it's a story of a very poor fisherman who finds the biggest pearl ever. And he thinks it's going to bring him happiness, but it in fact corrupts his soul, and it destroys everything that he hoped for and loved. And for me, it's a little bit like The Old Man and the Sea, the Hemingway book. It's once again, it's that being a novella. They're just these little gems of literature that say so much. And for me, what came from the Steinbeck book, The Pearl, was not only the underlying message that that what we wish for can in fact be incredibly destructive, but the humanity, the humanism of the storytelling, which of course permeated all of Steinbeck's work, and the notion that there's always this tension between good and evil. That each of us has elements of both of those things, which much later, I take up in the Kabbalion. But it was the humanism, really, of that book that struck me.
Yeah. You wanted to get the rights to that book and turn it into a movie, didn't you?
I did. I met with John Steinbeck's, I think it might have been his son, in Cannes. When we sat down, we had a talk about it. He had already licensed the rights to somebody else. I don't know whether the film has ever got made or not. I think it might have. But I very much did want to make it into a film. When I couldn't get the rights, I then decided to write my own version of it, called The Nugget. And The Nugget is about 3 road workmen in Australia. And on a weekend, they take out their metal detectors and they go out into the bush, and mainly it's an opportunity for them to have a piss up. But they find the world's biggest nugget. And just like the pearl, they think it's going to bring them all the things they've ever wanted, but it begins to destroy their relationships and so forth. And The Nugget starred Eric Bana, who's become quite a well-known actor. And even now, 25 years after having made that film, it's still in release in streaming and so forth. And the film certainly is well known in Australia.
Wow. Book number 5. And just like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, this one, every year, is in the top 10. Autobiography of a Yogi. Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1946. Everyone loves this book.
Yeah. It is an extraordinary book. And I think, as I say in my piece covering this that when I first read it, I didn't get it. It took me a long time to reach a point of development where I did understand it and accept it. I mean, there are so many outlandish things in the book, of course, bilocation, telepathy, levitation, healing. But when I did come back to it, after having learned so much from elsewhere, I got it. I really got it. And it, like I said in my covering thing, it came as no surprise that it was a very important book for Steve Jobs. But what's really interesting, Sandie, is that this is where my interest in intuition kicks in. Because one of the strong things that comes through in Autobiography of a Yogi, of course, is the power of intuition. And this was one of the things that Steve Jobs hooked onto. I mean, he was very much an advocate of intuition over intellect. He said that often in his public speaking. And possibly that came from this book, because it's said that he read this book every year of his life. And he gave copies to those who attended his memorial service. So what Yogananda says about intuition in the book had a very deep impact on me.
Yeah. Have you ever listened to the recordings made by Ben Kingsley, the CDs, reading the book? There's about 20 CDs in the set. And Ben Kingsley is reading it, and it is so powerful.
Oh, he'd be fantastic. He'd be a fantastic narrator for it. Yeah, no, I'll have to track that down. That'll be amazing. His interpretation, that would be incredible.
Yeah. Book number 6, From Intellect to Intuition, Alice Bailey, 1932.
Well, I'm sure you have a lot of Alice Bailey books in your collective.
Not as many as you would think. They're certainly not in the top 10.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is it because she's so difficult?
I don't know. She's not the easiest. And I think that, as time goes on, people, there are other books that come along that stay in people's minds more. What I found is that the simpler the book, the simpler the concepts, the more grounded and straightforward, the more people love them. The Four Agreements, The Alchemist, books like those, The Power of Now. They're the ones that come up again and again and again. And the parables.
Yeah, like The Alchemist. Yeah. No, Alice Bailey is an acquired taste, let me put it that way. But I do love the intellectual framework that she creates. And that book and a number of other of her books have been very important to me, particularly in writing a book that I have called The Golden Nugget. Sorry, the Golden Nugget, the Golden Bridge. I researched Alice Bailey quite a bit when I was writing that book. It's just jumping back a bit. What in 1999, I think it was, I was working on a movie in New Orleans, a thriller, and I had to go to the airport to get a flight for a casting back in Los Angeles. I was driving. It was early morning. There was no traffic on the road. It was dark, and I was approaching an intersection at a green light up ahead. I went to accelerate. I was running late and wanted to make sure that I got through on the green light, and a voice kicked in said, "Slow down." This is the first time I'd ever heard a voice like this, and I dismissed it. And I thought, that's weird. And I went to accelerate again. The voice said a second time, "Slow down," more emphatically. I slowed down, and a huge truck ran the cross street, ran the red light, ran the cross street. I slammed on my brakes, narrowly avoided getting hit by the truck. Had that voice not said, "Slow down," had I not listened to that voice, I would have been killed. And I pulled up on the other side of the intersection, shaking, adrenaline, but with three clear questions in my mind. What was that voice? Where did it come from? And why was my life saved? And those three questions then started me on a 10-year journey to make a film on intuition, where I traveled around the world 4 times interviewing mystics, psychics, neuroscientists, gurus and so forth to find out what that voice was. And in the making of that film, that changed my life.
Yeah, you got Bruce Lipton in that film, and Caroline Mace, and my sweet friend Michael Tamura.
Michael Tamura, dear man.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. And whose voice was it?
Well, I went up to the Dalai Lama's temple in Dharamshala, and I wasn't able to speak to the Dalai Lama. He was not there at the time, but I did speak to the head of his library and archives, a very learned scholar. And he said the most sensible thing to me. He said that it was an aspect of myself that was basically paying back karma, that in a previous life I must have done something good, and this aspect of myself was a karmic interpretation of that, basically saying, now's not your time to go, you've still got work to do, we're giving you this one on a platter. And that combined with Paul Selig, where I started to learn that each of us is an aspect of God, an aspect of the divine. That made sense to me, that, and so really it was myself talking to myself.
Yes. Yeah.
But my divine self talking to myself.
Yeah. And you mentioned Paul Selig. Well, of course, that's book number 7 on your list, The Book of Mastery. That's the first book in the Mastery trilogy, and that one was published in 2016.
When I was making this film on intuition, I became quite interested in channeling. And I started to realize that legitimate channels, and there are some people who present themselves as channels but aren't really, but legitimate channels, and there are a few of them, and they are terrifyingly good, have a direct connection to source. And Paul Selig is one of these people. He takes no ownership on the material at all. He always talks about this being the work of what he calls the guides. And basically I was interested in channeling because I wanted to find not an interpretation of what my purpose was, but I wanted to find a direct communication as to what my purpose was. And I thought maybe I could learn to channel. I've not pursued that as such, but it did introduce me to Paul and to Lee Carroll, who I've been introduced to earlier through my wife. And these people are the real deal. Yes. I mean, I have been to live readings, if you like, with both of them. And I have seen them channel 30, 40-minute monologues non-stop. And both my wife and I, are very astute dramatists. We know when something is read from a learned text or memorized, or if there's fakery in it. There's no fakery in the stuff. They're talking highly sophisticated, highly complex concepts in a way that you just can't get from any other source. So what I did is, after reading the Book of Mastery, I then went back and started at the beginning of his series called I Am the Word, the first book. I read everything then up to the Book of Mastery, and then I've read everything since, and I've become friends with Paul. And when I'm in a place where he is, we go out and have dinner and so forth. And he Michael Tamura certainly impacted my life. Lee Carroll has, but Paul Selig has probably had the greatest influence.
Yeah. Yes, I can understand that. Book number 9, Life Between Lives. This one comes up a lot. Michael Newton, published in 2004.
Oh, good. I'm pleased it comes up a lot. Once again, while making the film on intuition, I started becoming very interested in... I've always been interested in the soul. You know, there are two things that have always fascinated me. One is consciousness. What is consciousness? And the other is the soul. What is the soul and what is its purpose? And Jennifer, my wife, put me on to Dolores Cannon and her work. And I was then led by a bloke in Australia named Peter Smith, who ran the Michael Newton Institute for quite a long time. And he put me onto this book. And along with Dolores Cannon's work, suddenly a whole lot of stuff really kicked into place. After making the film on intuition, I realized that the greatest obstacle to intuition is fear. We all have intuitive impulses. We all have access to our intuition, but most of us don't enact on it because we're fearful. You know, our intuition often asks us to take unconventional steps, or steps outside of what might be deemed common sense. And fear normally stymies that for most people. And so then I made a film on fear. And I met Joe Dispenza and once again Bruce Lipton. Carolyn again came in on that. And that was, and of course the greatest fear is fear of death. And so this brought me back to the journey of the soul. In speaking to Peter Smith, reading that book, to watching Dolores Cannon's YouTube videos, there's a lot of them and they're amazing. It really brought home the fact that we don't die. You know, both Dolores Cannon and Michael Newton lay out the soul's journey, and it just makes sense to me. Yeah. And so I'm not afraid of dying anymore.
Yes. Book number 10, Kabbalion, William Walter Atkinson. And you said this one came late in your spiritual development.
Yeah. Does this book come up often?
No. I mean, it has come up, but no, not with any great frequency.
Yeah, it's an unusual book, and I don't know why I found it or how I found it, but I remember first reading it as an audiobook in the car while driving, and I just went, wow, you know, this is really, really interesting. One of the things that really interested me was this notion of polarity, that there are opposites, of course, but the opposites are the same. There's just a different range of frequency between the two opposites. And so in the book they talk about, fear and hope, or hot and cold, or even east and west. Where is east and where is west? Where is anger? Where is love? There's just a frequency range between them, and where you sit on that frequency, and what that means is that you can shift that frequency. You can shift that pointer between say anger or hate or fear and love, and that I think was probably the most profound thing that I found in that book for me. You know, was that we can alter our worldview according to how we alter our frequency response to it. It's called an occult book. Some people call it an occult book. And the word hermetic, I understand, means secret, like the secret laws of the universe. And there's so much in that book that I'm still grasping with, the concept of the all and the absolute versus the relative. You know, these are highly sort of sophisticated philosophical concepts. But it is a book that I dip into and out of quite a bit to just sometimes adjust my thinking.
Well, that's your 10 books. So now I want to talk about you. Your Camino walk eventually became the memoir and later the film. Looking back, do you see that particular journey as one of the pivotal turning points in the kinds of stories that you wanted to tell?
Sandie, how the book came about was this. I told you about that near miss with the truck, and then I struggled for a long time to get that film made. Now, I've been quite successful at getting films made in the past, and this was an outlet for me. A lot of people who had helped me with the financing films prior said, "Yeah, look, I get what you're trying to do, but there's no precedent for it. There's I couldn't get it financed, basically." And I thought that the blockage shouldn't lie outside, with them. It lay with me. And so what I decided to do was I decided to walk the Camino intuitively and to dedicate my walk to this film that I wished to make. And so what I did, now just to explain what that means, the Camino is an 800-kilometer walk across Spain, starting on the French side of the Pyrenees. It's a very demanding walk, and a lot of people plan it out step by step, plan, the best place to stay and best places to eat and things like that. Being a film producer and director, I plan everything. I'm a meticulous planner. But with this, I decided that I wouldn't plan anything. I would absolutely wing it and go with my intuition, what I call my PGS, my personal guidance system. And because just on that, what I came to understand is that intuition is a legitimate system in our body. It just works within the energetic realm. It's as legitimate as our circulatory system, our immune system, our digestive system, and so forth. It's our intuitive system, but it works within the energetic field, and so can't be quantified by science. But it's there, and it works. And its primary function is to guide us on our purpose through life. And part of that function is to keep us alive. And that's what happened when I heard that voice. Anyway, so I decided to do this walk intuitively. I didn't plan anything. I winged it. And in doing so, I went places and met people that I wouldn't have otherwise met or gone. And that walk did have a huge impact on me. Within 12 months of doing that walk, Sandie, I was making that film after struggling for something like 10 years without having been able to get a breakthrough. And what happened was that in walking intuitively and realizing that I was safe in doing that, not only safe, but in fact, I was having a richer experience because of it. It gave me the confidence then when I came back to approach the film in a totally different way. I had been approaching the financing and production of that film in a analog way, if you like, or a linear way. I had to throw that away and approach it in a metaphysical way. In other words, I had to approach the making of the film intuitively. And prior to that, I'd been making it logically and mechanically.
Were you surprised at its success?
Yes. Yes, I'm always surprised when something I do connects with an audience. It's a wonderful thing. What's been really interesting, Sandie, is that since making that film on intuition, prior to that, I'd been making thrillers and romantic comedies and a couple of social issue films, but really it was the thrillers and the romantic comedies that were my staple. But from that film on, I only wanted to make films that I felt were worth making, that really put something out there that could have a very positive influence on people. And that has defined my work ever since.
One of the things that people love about that book is the humour. The blisters, the knee pain, the frustrations. Why do you think humour is so important in telling a spiritual journey?
It's a really good question, Sandie. I'd read quite a few books on the Camino prior to my walk, and I thought they were so bloody serious and so self-righteous, and so they took themselves so seriously. And when I sat down to write the book, I chose deliberately to take what I called a Bill Bryson approach to it, to be self-deprecating, to be totally honest and transparent in my failings and my weaknesses and my fears, but to also make fun of it and make fun of me. In other words, look, they talk about the laughing Buddha, and we talked about Michael Tamura before. Now, the thing about Michael Tamura that defined him, of course, was his laugh. And I don't see why spirituality needs to be so damn serious.
I agree.
Yeah, and, I didn't want to make the film. I don't know whether you know that or not, but, it was literally 10 years after publishing the book that I released the film. And that wasn't because I struggled getting the film made. The film actually came together really quite quickly. It's just because I didn't want to make the film. And the reason I didn't want to make the film was because I didn't think that what I'd done was anything special, really. And I didn't really see that there was a story in it. I didn't think that there was enough substance to make a film. And probably, if I'm absolutely totally honest with myself, I didn't think it was possible for me to write and make a film about myself. And it's not that I wanted to protect myself or anything like that. I didn't. I mean, that didn't kind of enter into it. It's just that I didn't think that I could do it. But I had a friend who was a retired distributor, a very successful distributor, who read the book, and the book it affected him very, very deeply. And he persistently encouraged me to make a film on it. And really, because of him, I gave it a shot. And the only way that I was able to do it was really interesting, was this. When I sat down to write the screenplay, I decided that I would treat myself as a separate character outside of myself. I would see myself in the third person. I would see myself as being just another character in a movie that I was doing. And that allowed me to see that character with all of its foibles, with all its idiotic decisions, that turned out to be stupidly funny. And in seeing Bill as not me, Bill, but this character, Bill, I was able to do it. And in the making of the film, I was able to do it as well. And later on, if we want to have a conversation on one of your other podcasts, I can tell you the moment when that broke down. And it broke down, it really walloped me. I'll tell you now, there's a moment in the book and in the film where I'm just outside of Santiago, and I call my wife and I apologize for every horrible thing I've ever done in my life. And I was on the side of the road and leading into the Camino, and I just cracked open totally. And I wrote a blog about it, and what I said was very fresh. And then when I came to write the screenplay, I pretty much did it word for word. And we shot that scene in the exact same place where I made that phone call. And I watched the actor playing me, Chris Hayward, who did a very good job, say those words to my wife. I was standing a little bit away from the crew, watching on a monitor, on a stand, and everything just flooded back. It all just came back, rushed back, and hit me. And bawled my eyes out, and I couldn't protect myself. I just, as I had done on the day, it all came back in living colour. Yeah, and all the horrible things that I'd done, all the self-interest, the anger, the fury at times, that were all uncalled for. I apologized and I sought forgiveness, and that was a Camino for me.
That is an incredibly poignant moment in the movie. And, the woman who's playing your wife.
That is my wife.
That was your wife in the movie,
wasn't it? Yeah.
And the way that she didn't speak straight away, and you're sitting there thinking, what's she going to say? I mean, you've just poured out your heart there. What is she going to say? And that was a lovely moment, really. Very well done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they say that there are a couple of things that happen on the Camino. One is that at some point you meet an angel, and the other thing they say is that everyone who walks the Camino has a question. They may not know what that question is. They may not even be aware of the question, but the Camino will answer that question. And the other thing they say is that most people at some point in the Camino have a total breakdown.
I can imagine, yeah. It's interesting because you wrote The Golden Bridge, which begins with the man leaving home on the morning of his wife's funeral, and he just starts walking into the desert instead of attending the funeral. There's something about the Camino there, just somebody just getting on the road and going. Was it, did that idea for that book come to you on the Camino? I mean, how did that come about? Because I haven't finished the book yet. I've only just started it. But, it's a curious thing, and I can't, we look at the Camino as a pilgrimage. I mean, what is this man doing? Is it a pilgrimage? Is it he's walking with a question that he's looking for himself?
So it's really weird, that book. It was the middle of COVID. It was the middle of winter here in Mudgee in central New South Wales, and it gets very cold here, like about -4 Celsius, so forth. I woke up in the middle of the night with this story fully formed. That's all I can say. It was fully formed. And I don't know how it came about. I hadn't been thinking about it, doing a story like this at all. It wasn't a function of anything that had been in my mind. It was there, fully formed. And here's what happened. In the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, under my covers, I said, no, I'm not doing this. It's stupid. There's no market for it. It's going to take me at least 6 months of my life. I'm not doing it. And they came back and they said, yes, you are. You're doing it. Don't argue with us. And I said, no, I cannot. It's going to be a total waste of time. No one's going to be interested. No one's going to buy it. I'm not going to write this, just for the sake of writing it. And they said, yes, you are. And you're going to start tomorrow morning. The next morning I got up at 4 a.m. And this is what defined the writing from this point on. I got up at 4 a.m., cold, dark. I went to the coffee machine. I made myself a double espresso. I sat down at my computer and cleared my mind. I didn't meditate as such, but I just, consciously cleared my mind. And I started writing. And I wrote from about 4:30 through until about 9 or 9:30. And I wrote every day until it was finished. And it just came like that. And I can't understand it or rationalize it or make sense of it. There were times when I needed to do research. Thoughts would come to me during the day after I'd finished writing at 9:30 or so. And then that evening I would do what necessary research there was. There's this wonderful section on dowsing. And so I needed to research dowsing, for instance. And like I say, I dipped into Alice Bailey, I dipped into Saint-Germain. But basically, my job was to step aside and just allow the writing to happen.
How long did it take?
Didn't take long. It took about 30, 40 days.
And some readers compare this book to The Alchemist.
Yeah. Well, you finish it and let me know. What do you think?
I will. Did you get to the end of it and understand then why they wanted you to write it? Or were you still doing as you were told, baffled, but, obeying orders?
Kind of a bit of both, really, Sandy. I mean, I saw the book. When I saw the book complete, I thought, okay, well, that has been a really worthwhile exercise. Marketing is not one of my strong points, and I got picked up by a New York publisher, quite a prominent New York publisher, but we disagreed over terms because I wanted to keep the film rights, and so I bailed out of that. I then went with a small Melbourne-based publisher, but the book hasn't really got out there. And I really think that it deserves to. But like I say, you read it and let me know. What do you think?
I will. You've spent decades, telling stories through film and books. Do you think storytelling itself is a spiritual act?
Oh, totally. I mean, people who... I've got very little time for people who say, I channeled this, because it's bullshit. We all channel. Any artist channels. It's just what you do. I was flipping through YouTube or on one of the reels on Facebook, and I came across the David Gilmour from Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
And he was talking about Wish You Were Here and the gestation of that, the generation of that. And he was saying exactly the same thing. He just said it just came to him and he doesn't know why. And he said, if I try and analyze it, it's like trying to pick up a butterfly. He said, if you pick up a butterfly, all you're going to do is you're going to end up with dust in your hand. And he said, I don't try and analyze these things. I just acknowledge that they happen. So you see, I really respond to your no bullshit spiritual book club, because this aspect of no bullshit is really terribly, terribly important. We've got Deepak Chopra, coming out with the Epstein files, which shatter a lot of people. There have been others as well. And, it's so important that we find authenticity with the people that we read, that we learn from. I was on a live stream yesterday with Paul Selig, and he was answering a question from somebody, and you said, it was really interesting. You said, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a guru, I just turn up. And I think that Paul has got a terrifyingly strong no bullshit filter. He's a former academic at NYU, and he's, I don't know whether you've met him, but he's...
I've interviewed him once.
Yeah. Well, you know what he's like. He's got a very strong intellect, a very strong personality, and he doesn't suffer fools. And I respond to that.
I think, everybody wants the truth. And, when someone falls from grace, does something that unexpected of them, if they just admit, rather than coming up with excuses, if they just say, do you know what? I'm human, I made a mistake. People would forgive them in a heartbeat because that's truth. When someone can face that, and it's truth. And we all know truth when we hear it. And so, the whole stuff about, I've done everything in the media, and I spent a lot of time doing what I call resonance marketing, which is quite different from mainstream marketing. But that people think that everyone is going to be bamboozled because they dress something up. Do they think that we can't feel that? that we don't know when someone's lying to us. We all know, that we've all got that bullshit meter. The world would be a much better place if people were just honest with one another. And then at least you know where you stand.
Yeah, I think coming back to the my way and my reluctance to make the movie, my saying that I didn't think there was anything in it and that I didn't do anything special. What I came to realize, Sandie, is that that was in fact the thing that people wanted. They didn't want a hero story. They just wanted a story of an ordinary bloke struggling.
Everyman story,
Yeah. And I didn't realize that, at the time. It was only later that I started to think, well, that's why people are responding.
Yeah. Looking back over your life, the books, the films, the Camino walk, what do you feel has been the real journey underneath it all?
I keep on coming back to that image of the Buddhist temple on the hill in the golden light, Sandie. And I wonder how my life would have changed had I taken those steps up to that temple. But I've always been curious as to why I'm here and what it's all about. And I've taken the view that if I have this curiosity, then other people have curiosity themselves. That if I'm interested in pursuing a particular line of inquiry, then it's probably, I'm probably the mouthpiece for other people who want to ask the same sort of questions. I'm in a very privileged position where I can go to people like Dr. Joe Dispenza or Carolyn Mace or Paul or whomever, and ask them questions that people would want to ask. In the end, for me, it comes down to understanding the soul's journey and your purpose. And I think now I'm only just starting to get a handle on what my purpose is, after all this time. And I've made huge mistakes, and I've gone down pathways that I shouldn't have gone down. But then again, everything you do in your life leads you to what's happening right now, to where you are right now. The wayward paths, the cul-de-sacs, the car crashes that you have, and so forth. They all lead to where you are right now. And you can't have any regrets. You can only be thankful that you made those mistakes.
So what is the final answer?
The final answer is to live with joy and love and keep a sense of wonder, I think. At a certain point in your life, you begin to count back. When you're young, you count forward, or you don't count at all. But when you get to the age of 73, which I will be shortly, you start to count back. How many films do I have left in me? How many books do I have left in me? How many years or months or days do I have with my beautiful wife and my children? And when you start to count back, every day becomes precious, every moment becomes precious. And you have to treasure the opportunity to use those moments in the best way possible. And that's not a desperate thing. That doesn't come out of any sense of desperation. It comes out of it's what it does is it creates an intensity for life, I think. An intensity for the opportunities of life, and in all aspects. But joy, love, and wonder, they're the things that I grasp.
Yeah. Well, we come to the final question, which you've already stolen my thunder on this one, because you've given half of it away. But we ask every single guest. Steve Jobs famously gave a copy of Yogananda's book to people who attended his memorial service. We all know that. What book would you give to the people who attend your memorial service?
Well, crikey, there's a question.
And it doesn't have to be one of these 10.
No, I'm thinking outside the box. Okay, so I'm running through a whole list of things. David Copperfield, the collected works of Shakespeare, I've never read the Bible, but I think it probably would be worth reading.
Hard one, isn't it?
It's a really, really hard one, Sandy. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sort of tempted to say I Am the Word, Paul's first book, because pretty much everything is laid out in that first book. For somebody, I have recommended that book to so many people who are in distress.
It's a good one. Nobody's said that before.
I do think that these books that Paul is doing are the modern Course in Miracles. That's how I regard them.
Yeah.
And I think, as I say, the first book is everything that you pretty much need to know is in that first book.
I think it's a good choice.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it at that then.
Okay. Bill Bennett, thank you so much for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. It's been a real privilege to talk with you.
Well, Sandy, it's been a big honour to be included in this list. Thank you. I mean, it's extraordinary what you're doing. The legacy that you're leaving is incredibly important. And I think it's extraordinary what you're doing.
Thank you.
So thank you.
So, reflection time. Listening to Bill Bennett talk about the books that shaped him, you begin to see a thread running through his life. Curiosity, imagination, and a willingness to question what lies beyond the visible world. From childhood science fiction to spiritual philosophy, from filmmaking to walking across Spain, the journey keeps circling the same question. How much of reality are we actually paying attention to? Many of the books that he chose point to the same idea in different ways, that there may be more to life than what we can see, measure, or explain. But none of them claim to give final answers. Instead, they invite us to pay closer attention to intuition, to experience, to those moments when life seems to hint that something deeper is going on. So perhaps the real question is, how much more is going on in this world than you've allowed yourself to believe? Bill Bennett is an award-winning Australian filmmaker, author and storyteller who's written, produced and directed 17 feature films and numerous documentaries, earning major Australian film awards and international recognition. His best-selling memoir, The Way, My Way, recounts his transformative pilgrimage along the Camino de Santiago and later became a feature film. His work increasingly explores intuition, spirituality, and the deeper dimensions of human experience. So for more information and to learn more about his book, The Golden Bridge, visit billbennett.com.au. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for listening. Till next time.
If today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other shows. The Synergy Sessions, where leading-edge thinkers collide in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities. Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysterious consciousness, energy, and the hidden layers of reality, where science converges with spirit in ways you've never imagined. And the No BS Spiritual Book Club, where leading-edge new thought speakers, teachers, authors, and luminaries who've walked this path before you share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on their life journey. All 3 shows are available on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and all major podcast platforms. For more information, visit sedgbeer.com. That's SEDGBEER.com.